Started here. Good evening, everybody. My name is Carol Grooms, and I'm the current president of the American School Band Directors Association. And I am so happy to be here and to have the honor of introducing our guest and kicking off this second in our series of interviews with musical icons. We have a great one tonight, a great musician, great friend of ASBDA and of all music educators, Mr. Larry Livingston from the University of Southern California, and Monte Dunnum, a former past president of ASBDA, is going to be asking the questions and sort of facilitating the interview tonight. And he's going to keep an eye on the chat, as will I. So if any of you have specific questions that you would like to ask Mr. Livingston, just type them in there. And I think we're in for a real treat to be inspired and hear from this amazing mind in music and an amazing heart too. So Monte, I'll turn it over to you.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming. Over the course of the pandemic, some of us have had a chance to connect through Zoom and just get to know some other people a lot better than we probably would have had we not had this chance. So one of those blessings that we've had through this pandemic. One of those gentlemen is Mr. Larry Livingston. Larry, will you just give us a background on what you're doing right now?
What I'm doing right now?
Well, not this second, but your current position at USC and what other things you're pursuing.
Sure, thank you. Thanks for having me do this. I'm honored to participate, and hopefully people will find it in some way or other meaningful. My position at USC is I'm the chair of the conducting department in the Thornton School of Music, which is the School of Music name within the university. And that's my day job.
That's great, Larry. Most all of us can look back to a person or persons that made a big influence on our life, and perhaps were the reason we chose music. I mean, I'm sure they were the reason we chose music. For you, who was that person, and how did you come about choosing this as your profession?
That simple answer to that is my father. I grew up in a home where my father was a school band director, a jazz musician. He had a music store. He was one of the most obsessive workaholics I've ever met. And we had music in the house all the time. So until I was about 6 or 7, I didn't realize this was unusual. This was just my view of the world. I thought it was everybody. And so he used to have his jazz group rehearse in the basement of our little house. And I'd be down there with pots and pans at age 2, just beating on them. And I started playing piano when I was 3 or 4. And I continued that. And then my dad continued to be a significant influence. He played clarinet. I decided to also play clarinet. And I thought I might become Benny Goodman. A lot of the younger people in this call have no idea who that was, but Benny Goodman was a legend, a jazz player. What I didn't realize is going into the cafeteria, you didn't have a lot of cool when you told kids you were sitting with you were playing clarinet. Guitar was cool. Clarinet was sort of living on the red line of nerdism. But anyway, I loved playing, and I kept working as a clarinet player. So it was really my dad. And then subsequently, because he knew a lot of people in the profession, and I grew up in a little town near Detroit, Harry Bejan had an influence on me because I knew Harry when I was in 8th grade. My dad had him come and conduct the band. So eventually I ended up going to Michigan, and I played in Ravelli's band, the legendary Michigan band. I was in the Russian tour band. I was one of the youngest people in the band. I was at age 18. 15 weeks in the Soviet Union in the Middle East. No chaperones, no security, the kind of idea that would be unimaginable now. But Ravelli had a tremendous influence on me because he was a great teacher about fundamentals, about sound, about rhythm, about balance, articulation. And it was a really tough love environment. He was capable of really getting caught in conductor insecurityism, and then he would attack somebody. So it wasn't always easy, but it was great. I played in the marching band, and I Loved every minute of that. I was the first person to get my University of Michigan marching band wool jacket. I wore it right in the middle of August and September in the heat. Then I finished my undergraduate degree in music ed, performance in music ed. It was a special degree program. And in those days, and when I tell my college students this, they go crazy, jobs were quite plentiful. So my clarinet teacher kept putting on my music stand job openings. And he kept saying to me, you're going to be like a permanent student or you're going to get out into the world. So one day he called me on the phone. I'm now like 22. And he said, this isn't a job you can apply for. This is a job you can have. And it was Luther College. And the reason that that connection took place is because Weston Noble, who subsequently became another significant influence, was doing a master's degree at Michigan in music ed, and he was taking clarinet lessons from my clarinet teacher. So that's how that connection happened. So I ended up going to Luther. I started teaching there when I was 22, like a crime against nature. I'm teaching people my age, and I still have to have a security clearance to go back to Decorah, Iowa for all the problems I caused in the 4 years I was there. But it was a really an epiphany for me, and a lot of that had to do with getting to spend time with Weston, who I first thought was rather anemic. He didn't have any of Ravelli's me versus you attitude. It was all about love and support. And then I watched him rehearse the Nordic choir, and I could sense the aura, the atmosphere he created. And Ravelli's rehearsals were about, oh my God, I hope he doesn't go down the line. I haven't practiced this enough. In Weston's rehearsal, it was all glass almost full, not half full, almost full. And so the buoying of the human spirit, which was one of his signatures, really inspired me. So I decided I'm not going to be like Ravelli. I'll be like Weston. Both of those were wrong-headed. I finally figured out that I need to, whatever it is, I need just to be me. But I spent a lot of time with Weston, and one of the sweet things that happened to me is, as I was getting ready to go off and pursue a doctoral degree in San Diego, Weston called me into his office and said, when you come back, if you come back to Luther, I'm going to give you the Luther band. I'll keep the choir, because he did the choir and the band all those days. And so I never forgot the generosity of that. Unfortunately, I didn't go back to Luther. And nonetheless, that was, for me, a real high point. And so certainly Ravelli and Weston. And then subsequently, I studied with all the smartest, best people I could get, and I didn't care if they were nice. So I encountered a fantastic violinist and a wonderful violin teacher named Rafael Druryon. And this was when I was in my late 20s. He was teaching at UCSD in La Jolla in the late 60s, which we called UCLSD. You can finish that sentence. Anyway, not me, but maybe some other people. And Rafael was a brilliant, brilliant teacher. He was George Zell's concert master at Cleveland. He'd studied with Zimbalist. And although I think the most complimentary thing he ever said to me, Larry, maybe you're not hopeless, I didn't care. I just wanted the goods. And he taught me so much about orchestral bowing and sound. So that was another. And then it's sort of endless. Anshel Brusilov, tremendous influence on me. So many people that are still alive, actually, profound influence. And I just became a sponge because all I really wanted to do was to get better. I just wanted to understand it better. And so the reason that I kind of modulated away from being essentially a band conductor was not out of any disaffection about band. I love band. I still do band all states and clinics. But I wanted to get deeper into music, and it just turned out that the lexicon of repertoire in the orchestral world provided an opportunity for me to develop further musically. So, but I've always looked for influence. I've always been available for that. And the Yiddish word is ganef, it means thief. I am a great stealer. So I watched someone do a clinic or something, and I was just doing a Colorado conducting workshop with Gary Lewis, who's a good friend of mine. And there are about 5 or 6 things that I took in my back pocket right out of Gary. He doesn't know it, but his bank account has been depleted by at least a few thou because I took 4 or 5 things. I'm always out there looking because I know that you never get over the goal line. You get on the 2-yard line, and you think, I got this, and you wake up and they move the goalposts. So for me, it is a pilgrimage toward enlightenment, which I will never arrive at, but that process has been significantly aided by all the brilliant people that I've gotten to know and learned from, either formally or informally.
I think that's a perfect bridge to another thing that we agreed we'd spend a little time talking about. And this would be, Larry, I'm gonna just give you names and talk about conductor attributes, or maybe it's things you've learned from these people, or maybe it's something you want to share about their ensemble. Let's start with John Painter.
I didn't know John super well, but I knew about him and we spent some time together. And I think John's zeal for clarity and precision and his ability to massage the Northwestern Wind Ensemble into what essentially was a gigantic chamber music ensemble, which for me is really the essence. So his way of working was also tough love to some degree. He was not a, pet the kitty on the podium. He was about truth, even if it had to be manifest with a certain bite. And also his control of the rehearsal and pacing. One of the things that's so hard for young conductors to learn is that you have an opportunity, if you own the group, to stop talking and just sit and allow the atmosphere to absorb, so that the rhythm of that rehearsal dynamic was something I thought John was a master of. And I don't think his students even knew it.
You already touched on Bill Ravelli William Ravelli coming up as a student there, but anything you observed from his conducting style, his attributes that you'd share?
Well, Ravelli was a violinist, and that was a tremendous advantage. He was a very good fiddle player. And so his interpretive approach to music, we did lots of transcriptions, which, by the way, let me pause and say, I'm going to urge every band director, play transcriptions. Okay, because the students are going to go to concerts and hear that music, and those wonderful transcriptions, and there are so many of them now, also are a window into deep art. So Ravelli's interpretive mentality was very much kind of early 20th century, and so it was quite romantic, and rubato was kind of his signature. But what I learned from him is sound. The sound of the Michigan band has never been replicated. He has that sound. And we have 95, 100 people in the band, and it had this coherent quality. And the band was, when I was in it, and it's probably still true today, was littered with people who were going to have great careers. Donald Cinta, in my view, the greatest saxophone player who ever lived, was in that band. Don Tyson became principal trumpet in Baltimore. Barney Pearson became principal trumpet in New Orleans. So this was not a collection of ordinary players to start with, and they were able to somehow allow him to massage that. So the sound, also his approach to rhythm, a very interesting approach to rhythm, and also his way of conducting, which, by the way, was, frankly, I mean, we were happy if he was still in 3 and the pieces in 3, but his way of conducting created a kind of dolcissimo sound in the band. And it was partly his physical way of conducting. And he grew up in a generation where the kind of virtuoso conducting that you think about today is the norm. He was not a virtuoso conductor. He was a tremendous musician and an adequate conductor. But he also had incredible eyes, and it reminded me of the great hockey player Maurice Richard, who was a star with the Montreal Canadiens. Those eyes would burn a hole in your forehead. Those are things I learned from Ravelli. Fortunately, I think I've been able to escape a large segment of the things that he did that were not, in my view, useful, even for him, and certainly weren't for me. like blaming people when he made a mistake. He could never do the 6/8 movement of the Giannini Symphony. It was hopeless. And so what he would do is blame the band. So one of the things that endears a conductor to what is the school ensemble or pro ensemble is to be vulnerable, say, you know what, let's do that again. I'll be clearer. I didn't make that gesture. It was my fault. But he didn't want to be discovered. And he was preaching to us all the time about morality and so on. I mean, it was really a bully pulpit in which band was only a component of a larger mosaic of messages he was sending. Anyway, I love the old man, and one of my sweetest memories is about a day or two before he died. I called him on the phone, and the first thing he said to me was, "How are you?" Sorry.
It's all priceless, Larry. Thank you. How about Glenn Cliff Bainham?
I played with him in high school, so you have to pass my comments through the deforming prism of high school mentality. He seemed like a nice old man, and he was fine, and we loved being around him. He was demanding but relatively genteel, and of course I was like, I think in 8th grade, and I was like second chair in a section of maybe 3,000. The clarinets had their own zip code. In those days, the bands were like, like locusts. And it was fun. I thought he was really good. I enjoyed it, but unfortunately, I don't really have any real insight because I was really so unformed that I also played with Clarence Sawhill, who's the UCLA person, also very good, at least based on being 14 years old and hoping that after rehearsal, one of the girls in the flute section would have ice cream with me. That was kind of my main profound focus.
Would Harry Begian fall under that same, high school experience, or any comment about
No,
Harry?
because I did clinics with Harry. I had I had an experience with him when I was like maybe 13, and then later on, Harry was more like Ravelli. He was very demanding, tremendous musician, great ears, but also a tendency to lose it and to, in my view, be unnecessarily personal in an almost vindictive way. And the sad reality for me, Monte, this is my 2 cents worth, is all of those explosions were a result of one thing only, and that's called insecurity. If you watch Lowell Graham rehearse, you will never see that. If Lowell Graham were to utter an intense comment to somebody, it's because the intensity is needed for them. But both Ravelli and Harry had the tendency to get mad because they were afraid they're going to be found out. They didn't know how to fix something. And they're thinking, I'm up here, I should be able to fix this. And what that ends up being is, flutes, aren't you ever going to watch me? And of course the flutes are staring at him already. So all of that, collection of characteristics to me, today it would be unacceptable. But worse, they're not useful. We loved Ravelli in spite of him. And when we did the first reunion of the Russian tour band, I told him that. The band asked me to give a talk about my experience with him, and I said, Dr. Ravelli, we didn't love you because we believe in all your morality and your speeches. We loved you in spite of some of your behavior because what you gave us was priceless. But it was not without a cost to get it. And he was okay. So I'd put Harry was a tremendous musician, and Wayne State in Illinois, and the Cass Tech High School band. None of you are old enough to know this, but Cass Tech High School killed it. It was an incredible high school band in the 50s, and that was Harry Begian. And the best and most talented musicians from all over the city would come to Cass to play in Harry's band. In that school was Ronnie Carter, who's one of the greatest jazz bass players in the world. And anyway, that's my comment about Harry.
Thanks, Larry. How about one more? How about Fred Fennell?
Freddie was brilliant, and as life would have it, as fate would have it, he, in my view, should have had Boston Pops, because Freddie had all the stuff for that. Freddie was diminutive, a fireball, loved to dress with the red tie, and he was a brilliant musician. The time I spent with Fred was all about sound, all about making sound. And his recordings for the Eastman Wind Ensemble are still definitive, and the Japanese thing he did. But Fred wanted to be an orchestra conductor. And Fred went to Minnesota to be assistant to, what's his name, that was there for years. I'll think of his name in a minute.
Ben Cresciuto?
Say again?
Was that when Ben Cresciuto was there, or is it before that?
No. Ben Cresciuto was a college guy. I'm talking about the Minnesota Professional Orchestra.
Got it.
He's a Polish guy. What the hell's his name? He's a wonderful conductor. Anyway, Fred was there for 1 year, conducted nothing.
Stanislaw Skrobachevsky.
Yeah, thank you, Skrobachevsky. And so Fred basically left Eastman, where he had a terrific wind ensemble, which he invented, by the way. There was no wind ensemble before Fred at Eastman. And Fred's contribution to the field is he defined wind ensemble. If you got a collegiate program, in the old days you wanted to have a good band. You can still have a band, but your top group is going to be the wind ensemble. And that was one of Fred's contributions. And Fred begged people like Smedvig, all these guys, Rolf Legband and Ross Powell, and all these great players. He talked him into playing in the Eastman Wind Ensemble because he was teaching percussion. He didn't have anything to conduct. But Fred was brilliant, great score knowledge, conducting from memory, not a fake. Knew the score, did the work, and really was, in my view, ready when he left Eastman to do something wonderful. And then when the Minnesota thing basically shut him down, he decided, I think, then he went to Miami, and then he did the Japanese thing. But his clarity, his ideas about rehearsing, his humor, his imagination, his imagery, I thought were really, really powerful. And at his best, he was a really wonderful conductor. Unfortunately, at the end, all those old people, someone has to tell us, it's time. And Fred went through maybe the last 3 or 4 years, not good. But in his halcyon days, he was terrific. And he's the one who made it necessary for band people to start conducting without the music. Because the imprimatur of orchestral conducting and high art was one of the qualities that Fred stood for. So.
I'm going to throw one more in there because I know he's a friend of yours, but what impact has John Williams had on your life musically?
Well, first of all, John is a tremendous musician. He's a sweetheart of a guy. He's a great jazz pianist. So is his brother. He is, I think, the definitive composer in the film world, and a very good composer of art music as well. And I've spent time with John at his office in Universal Studios, and he still writes at the piano. He still has that kind of authentic connection, and he was always very kind to me. And I was lucky because when I was at New England Conservatory in the 70s and early 80s, he became the conductor of the Pops, and that's how I got to know him because New England Conservatory's building is right across the street from Symphony Hall where the Pops played. They also play on the Esplanade, but their main home was in Symphony Hall. So I spent a lot of time with John. We talked about music, we talked about life, we talked about golf. It was until he hurt his back. He was a real serious golfer and a real gentleman, a really, really refined human being. I never heard him utter a foul word. I never heard him do anything that broke the covenant of who he presented as a kind of an English gentleman, kind of an aristocratic bearing. On the other hand, I personally witnessed a couple of times when something happened with his music that he was not happy about, and he handled it very well. I won't go into the details, but he told the person who was running this particular project, I'm happy that you did my music. You cannot release those performances publicly at all. But he didn't do it out of anger. He did it because, well, it was unfortunately, only Perlman can play Schindler's List. Only Perlman, only he can make that sound. And someone else was playing it who was a very competent violinist. And John said no. And also it involved his horn concerto. I won't go into that. He just said, no, I'm too old just to say everything's fine. He would never do that to a high school band, but this was a pro situation where the likelihood that it would be available publicly was pretty high. So he just said no, but he didn't do it in a cruel, nasty way.
Thanks, Larry, for a lot of that perspective and some history comments there that I think
I did say once to John, I said, did you ever write a credit check to Stravinsky for, what's the shark movie?
Would that be Jaws then, or?
Yeah, for Jaws. Da-dum, da-dum. And also I asked him another time, I said, did you ever pay royalties to Strauss for I Can Read Your Mind? Or He Can Read Your Mind? This is exactly the same harmonic progression. There's a 5/7 of 2, and he just laughed.
It's awesome, Larry. Recently, you did a session for Con Selmer, something along the lines of using problems as an asset. Would you just like to comment on that just a little bit now and, direct us to that if we need to?
I think it's human nature that we wish to wake up one day and nothing bad happens. Everything's fine. People show up, everybody's doing their work, the rehearsal's good, everyone's prepared, your wife's happy, etc. That's what we fantasize about. Well, first of all, that's almost never going to happen. And I decided as I was thinking about all the problems that I've dealt with, many of which are self-inflicted, I realized that the problems are there for a reason. They have a rabbinical value. They can actually provide opportunities for growth. And so there's a wonderful book by B.F. Skinner called Walden 2. And it's actually referenced to Thoreau's Walden. And in the book, Skinner, who is a behavioral psychologist and a professor at Harvard, talks about this idyllic kind of fantasy community in which everybody is happy. All the problems have been solved, and it's based on a kind of a procedure called positive reinforcement. And so no one has anything to worry about. Everything's fine. And then when you look at that, I realize if you had that, you get up in the morning and you're going to go, what am I doing here? What's my thing here? Because we're all just like happy. And clearly on the heels of COVID, it's pretty tempting to imagine a trouble-free life. Everything's good. You don't have to worry about anything, whether it's food or your job or your car or your marriage, nothing. But I came around to the idea, which is not unique to me necessarily, that the problems are there for a reason. It is the problems that engender creativity, that lead us to new realms, that make us pause and reassess what we're doing to the point where it's a form of reshaping that's available. So I said, thank God for the problems. The problems are the grail. And it's not to say I can't wait to have problems, but it's an attitude about problems and solving problems.
If we want to catch the whole interview, go to Consumer because it's posted at the Institute page then? Okay, thanks, Larry.
The title of the speech is Expect Curveballs.
Expect
Use the baseball metaphor, especially since I live in LA. That's a good metaphor to use now. Expect curveballs. Don't rue them. Don't create them. And when you encounter them, how can you use them as a vehicle for personal growth?
Well, and speaking of that, I think coming out of the pandemic, Larry, one of the things that we've discussed, and I think the people here would benefit from hearing, many of us will be concerned about our concert attendance. Communities have settled in on whatever concert they can get and sitting at home and watching it, digitally and so on. And one time we were talking and you mentioned making your concert an event. Would you care to elaborate or share some thoughts you had on that?
Yeah, thank you. I actually, at the 50th anniversary of CBDNA, I think it was 50th in 2005, I gave kind of the wrap-up keynote talk, and that was the thrust of it, was when you think about the glut of entertainment that people have available. And of course now you don't have to go anywhere. You have it all. You got Netflix, you got a phone, you got a computer. So how do we create moments that are sufficiently compelling that I'd want to get in my car and go see it or watch it? And so my point was sensitive to the danger of cheapening what we do, which I think is also not a good idea. How do you create something in which there's a buzz? How do you create something in which there's some talk in the community? If you're talking about a high school band, you got to go to the concert. And interestingly enough, one of the spark plugs for that was my dad. My dad he had a heart attack when I was in 9th grade. He was a chain smoker and a workaholic and no exercise. He got the junior high band, and he made it into one of the great junior high bands in America. They produced a show every year, and he wrote all the music, can you imagine, from scratch? And he didn't have Sibelius or Finale. He was actually writing it. And they brought people from the Chamber of Commerce. There was a guy in the Chamber of Commerce who was a good singer, so he brought him to sing. He had people conduct. He had people dancing. He just created this moment which was everybody wanted to be there. And so after he did one the first year, the next year he did it 2 nights in a row. And he used the junior high band as the vehicle, but all kinds of stuff was packaged into it. And the community was so excited about it. Now, this is a long time ago, and I'm not naive about how hard it is to do this, but doing over and over again the same songs that Carl Fisher publishes every year, which sound like last year's songs, frankly, and expecting people to show up for that, why would they? So I was trying to, I guess, goad maybe, or chide people, coax people into the idea. Why don't you think about making an event? It doesn't have to be every concert, but maybe have this special thing that you do, and then people find out about it, and you can't get it at home, and it's not on TV. And what's core to it is the power of doing it live, including the mistakes and all the other stuff, because that's really the essence that makes live anything worth watching and doing. If you want a perfect recording of a Beethoven symphony, you don't need to go to a concert. But if you want to be there when this particular orchestra plays with this sound and this way of moving through phrases, and you have a sense of immediacy and the sense of moment, now you're talking. And of course, I think some people picked up on it. I know Gary Hill, who's a very good friend of mine. Maybe people know who Gary is. Gary's from Plymouth, Michigan. My dad started Gary Hill on percussion 5 years after I played clarinet. So Gary and I have been friends for a long time. And when he was at Arizona State, he made his concerts to success based on audience. The litmus for his concerts was how big of an audience did they draw. And to do that, he did some shuck and jive stuff that I thought was very cool. And it created a certain excitement and energy around his program. And of course, for the students, when the students look out and they see that, it looks like this really does matter.
Thanks, Larry. One other perspective that I think would be valuable for us to hear, with your focus being conducting. Let's talk about, conducting for the school band director. What do you see as the focus for a school band director and with regard to conducting?
Okay, the first thing I would say is that to be a great music educator, you don't have to be a great conductor. The country is littered with people who are passionate, effective, dedicated teachers whose trump card is not conducting. However, if you conduct better, they'll play better. It's simple. So if you look at the evolution and history of music educators, they have lots of courses in educational psychology, 14 music history courses on what Michaud had for breakfast, etc. One semester of conducting at best, and then they get out and they're flooded with bureaucratic junk. You have to do filling out forms and dealing with angry parents and trying to raise money. And lost in the shuffle is art, conducting, and why you went into this thing in the first place. So when I do these clinics, and I've done quite a few of them, what I often find is this band director wants me to observe his or her group, and I observe, and actually the band typically is quite good. What's not as good is the conducting, because the conductor has spent all of his or her time working and teaching and so on. And so for me, the curricula is part of the problem. Conducting is not sufficiently honored in undergraduate music ed curricula. And although I don't want to get off on this tangent because I have friends who are music ed faculty, but we also now have a generation of music ed faculty, more and more, who want to do research, which is important and useful and provides the basis for the validity of what we're doing. But more and more we've run away from, can you tune the band? Can you cue the oboe? What can you do on the podium? And so you end up finishing your undergraduate degree underprepared. Then you get out and you get swallowed up by all the effluvia that is part of public school life. So my thought is the following. You don't have to be Dudamel, you don't have to be Zubin Mehta, you don't have to do that. What I think you need to do is to be selfish. Because all great music educators are unselfish. They're either 24/7 at the school, dedicated to the kids, and have a hard time even have time on the weekend. That's one group. Or they're mediocre. There's no in between. So the real dedicated music educator is completely obsessed with the school. The danger of that is you make it so much about the giving that you don't think about the getting. And so I think that every band director, every school music educator, orchestra, whatever, should find in the schedule a sacred time. And that is to study a score, mark that score, and then conduct it without the score with your students, so that you keep connecting back to what it means to conduct. And secondly, to work on your conducting. Look, Elizabeth Green has a 20-minute video that you can get on YouTube. There's all kinds of instructional stuff. And most band directors or orchestra directors who are here, they're going to go, I don't have time for that. That's true, you don't have time. Actually, because you don't have time for it, you do have time for it. Because the reason you don't have time for it is you have engaged so fully in the giving process, and God bless you for doing it, that you just need to eat a chunk of that time and say, no, I'm not answering the phone if the principal calls, I'm not here, the school burns down. I'm working on Holst E-flat first movement to see if I can somehow get through that. And then in the warm-ups that you do with your group, and most school bands, some have very elaborate warm-ups, use that for conducting legato and staccato. So start thinking about how you can elevate your own level, because if you raise your level, they'll play better. So I don't know that. I'm sorry, you got me here on a spiel, and I do respect the thrust in music education in universities where people want to do research and understand neurological function. They want to know about oxytocin and dopamine. I know all about that. That's good. But at some point, you got to get in front of a bunch of kids and take them to a new world. And that research can't give you.
Thanks, Larry. It's awesome. I'm gonna ask you a different twist on something you said, which is, if you're good, you're living in the band room, you're doing all that, but we all have to find that release. So what are the releases for you, Larry? I know you like to read. I know you like to write. I know you're a great piano player. What are your release? And I know you're a runner. What are your releases, and how do you balance everything?
Well, thank you for that. I have to say, at age 78, I'm an ex-runner. I'm a walker. Running has disappeared from my daily regimen. I just had my right knee replaced 6 months ago, which, by the way, is a phenomenal procedure. First of all, my wife is an encyclopedia of love and capacity to enrich my life every day. So I have her. I also am an obsessive reader. I'm also a writer. I just created a book a couple years ago with a friend of mine, which I wrote captions to some flower photos. I try to find a few minutes a day to be with nature. Our generation and the one before it has done a good job of stealing that from the world. And in music, everything beautiful in music comes from nature and from quiet. Everything that's beautiful comes from those two sources. I happen to live backed up to a mountain. So if I go out in my backyard, I'm looking at mountain trails. And we see rattlesnake and coyote and deer. And we've had several times bear come up on our property. So I'm lucky because I live 20 miles from downtown LA, but where I live is really kind of in the sticks. So I try to find time for nature. I'm not a professional meditator. But serenity is important to me. Loneliness is different from solitude. And then I guess like my dad, obsessive about doing stuff. I get up in the morning and what I'm going to do today. I have a personal trainer and a physical therapist I work with like 5 times a week, trying to keep my body from disintegrating. Because one of the realities of aging is the machine starts to knock on your door. It just happens. And so I'm trying to fight that as best I can by being active, by walking, by doing some exercises. Also, my children are near me. My daughter, who's a phenomenal, famous songwriter, she lives in Pasadena, and my oldest son lives in Pasadena. My youngest son lives in Washington, but I have grandkids, so that's also a nurturing resource. Is thinking about, when you have grandkids, maybe some people here, most people on this call probably not old to even have kids, but if you have grandkids, you actually, when you're looking at that person, you are seeing you. You're remembering what it was like, how you experienced the world and how you connected to other people. So they are a treasure, and they're very funny. And so anyway.
Thanks, Larry. Another way I'm sure you relax, if you do relax when you listen to music, but what would be your desert island song album list that you would have to have with you?
Oh, that's a really hard question. I'm kind of an eclecticist. For a person who's supposed to be teaching conducting, I'm jamming on piano and I'm trying to keep up with Muse and Coldplay. I'm trying to be in that world. So that's a really hard question. Probably Mahler 2 maybe, which is an encapsulation of the entire living adventure. And I have to think of some of Skip's choral music, especially the Rose songs. Duraflame Requiem. I mean, there's a lot in that. Keith Jarrett playing Dedicated to You. Bill Evans. It's endless list. So I'm sorry, I'm disappointing you. I don't have the.
There is no disappointment, Larry. It's just great to hear you share what you're sharing. I did have a question from the chat back when we were talking about transcriptions. What would be your transcription suggestion for those of us in the band world, or your favorite, or which should we play?
Well, with Ravelli, we played things like Overture to Nabucco, which works very well for band. Bach, the Bach G major Fantasia, the Shostakovich 5 Last Movement, I think Festive Overture of Shostakovich. I'm not these days actively looking for and engaged in searching out, so I'm probably not the right person to turn to. But every day I understand now that there is a new transcription of the end of the Saint-Saëns Organ Symphony for band. You know who to talk to about this? Is sitting right above me. Lowell Graham's recordings of transcriptions with the Air Force Band are definitive. And I can tell you right now, he's not randomly picking transcriptions. He's picking transcribers who bring it. So he's the person. I have on my shelf about 8 recordings that he sent me years ago, and they're incredible.
Well, we'll probably ask you to give us some suggestions at some point as well.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Hey, Larry, also, I apologize if this is a big question late in our time, but what do you see as the biggest issue facing the music ed world at this time?
I think at a fundamental level that you cannot be completely human without music. The research in neuroscience shows bone flutes 40,000 years ago in the hands of a flute player can make spellbinding music. Oliver Sacks talks about the fact we're pre-programmed to love music neurologically. So what I think is the test is, now that we're coming back from COVID, can we develop an attitude about music education which goes like this? First assessment of my program, what percentage of kids in the school are doing music? Not how many trophies do I have. Second litmus, what percentage of the kids who are playing my groups keep playing as amateurs? I don't care about them going to Juilliard. Juilliard has too many students anyway, and it's a wonderful school, but we have this flood of people going to these great music schools for fewer and fewer jobs. So the development of a core of amateurs and dilettantes, which I know both of those have a stigma, not for me, so that people realize what the yield is. And so broaden the platform. There's a wonderful high school in Nassau County called Syosset High School. And I visited there years ago because I did a music ed curricular design for the Guitar Center when I was on their board. It's called All In. You can find it on the NAFME website. I went to Syosset High School. 57% of the kids in the high school are doing music. They have 3 bands, 2 orchestras, 3 swing choirs, songwriting, keyboard class, theory class. And the school, I walked the school, it did not look like a palatial Texas music building. It was just like my high school. Some lockers were broken and some of the chairs, the arms were off. But the superintendent and principal in that school made it an issue. And from that, there is going to be a delta of people who are not going to go on in music, they're going to go on with music. And to me, this needs to be a crusade more of us are on. There's nothing wrong with having a prize-winning band. It's not that that's irrelevant. It's wonderful. But the idea of hoarding this for a nucleus of people who are willing to buy buffet clarinets and Bach trumpets, this is not to denigrate that, and that we have this like 5% of the kids in my school are in my band, because if you're not willing to practice and beat out somebody and play a great instrument and take lessons, you can't be in my band. I think there is a liability there that has to do with what about the rest? And Amanda Drinkwater, who's an old friend of mine, is one of the greatest band directors in the world and an incredible human being. When we had a conversation years ago about that, she called me and she said, you know, you're right. I was walking down the hall of Marcus High School, where she's now an administrator. I think she's gone to the dark side. She said, I was walking down the hall and I saw a bunch of kids walking by me and I don't know who they are. And I wonder if music fits in their lives. So those are my takes. Bottom line, we will survive because we're fighters. We will not be kept from it. Music educators as a group have a sort of secret handshake. Get the hell out of my face. We're doing this for the kids. We're going to make this happen for children. So I think that flint and irreducible strength will carry the day. But even if it does, I dream of a world in which half the people who go to see the LA Philharmonic are amateurs. They don't play like the LA Phil. They're lawyers and dentists and accountants and bank robbers and whatever they're doing. And on the weekend, they're playing music. And I don't care if they're playing in a rock and roll band or playing viola. Just keep doing it, because neurologically, we know what it does for the human mind, for the human spirit, and to some degree for physical health. Anyway, that's my spiel. That's why I called my music ed curriculum All In. Come on in here. The guy who, Ken Knappensberger, was NAM's Music Educator of the Year about 8 years ago. He's a farmer in upstate New York, and he milks the cows every day before he goes to his school. You know what his motto is in the school? Anybody who wants to can, he's a choir guy. Anybody who wants to can be in my choir. Come on in here. And I just found that generosity and spirit of that is so fresh and so important.
It's great, Larry. What personally or professionally, what's next on your list? What are you hoping to accomplish, or goals or anything like that?
Well, I am very blessed, I guess, to say that I'm living my bucket list. I have a wonderful family. I have great friends. I love the students that I teach, and sort of what's not to like. So I'm working on a couple projects that I'm not at liberty right now to talk about, that I'm excited about. It's kind of, they're musical, but they're a new adventure for me. But otherwise, I already screwed up 4 music schools. I already sat atop New England Conservatory, Rice, USC, and for a year and a half, Westminster Choir College. So I'd spent 26 and a half years meddling with those fantastic schools. I've already been to the top of the mountain. I've already been there. So I just want to be well and be safe, and I want to try to be a better person. I want to try to be more gracious, more humble, more alert to what's around me. And I am a very determined advocate for social justice. It is time now. It is time. And if not us, who? And if not now, when?
Well, Larry, that's just such wonderful thoughts for you to share there. I'm complete with what I have here. I mean, we can certainly talk some more, but if anyone has any questions, this is your chance. Carol, should we just ask for questions, open mic, or do you want to post in the chat still?
Yeah, let's either
Awesome.
way. Let's do it. It's 8 o'clock and we can wrap up in the next few minutes. But if anybody has a question, here that they would like to ask, pop it in the chat or unmute or whatever. I'm enthralled, Larry. I've loved listening, hearing
Yeah.
everything you've had to say.
I'm happy to be in this world with all of these people. I got into this deal through Monte and the Band Buds, and I have a picture of my parents, my dad and mother, right by my office. And when I do Band Buds, I look at my dad because he would have been happy that I'm doing that, because that's what he was. He was Harold Hill, but he wasn't a fake. But every other part of him was just like Harold Hill. And that's something music educators need to understand. Harold Hill wasn't wrong. He was just a fake, but he was right about what playing band can do for you. So maybe I will end with a little joke, because normally I'm a joker. Why do scuba divers always fall backwards when they enter the water? Because if they fell forwards, they'd be in the boat. I know, atrocious. And by the way, an interesting reality is, I don't know if other people who have done Zoom talks would share this, jokes don't work on Zoom. Because it's this. So anyway, thank you very much, all of you, for listening in, and hopefully there's a scintilla of value from what I've been talking about, my long odyssey. We could do another interview. It would be 24 hours long, and I would list every second mistakes I've made, and we'd use the whole 24 hours.
You're a gem, Larry. You're just awesome. So thanks for sharing your time with us. Thanks to everybody for coming.
And
Carol?
everyone, if you have anything you'd like to leave as a comment for Larry, just put it in the chat. I'll be saving it. And you know, you've got a minute here to jot down anything you would like to say. Larry, jokes may not work on Zoom, but interviews certainly do. And I have enjoyed every second of this. Monty's a fabulous facilitator of interviews, and everything you've talked about tonight has resonated with me in some way. And I'm so thankful that we're recording this, because I wanted to be taking notes, and I wasn't prepared to do so. And I have a list in my mind of specific points that I want to make sure some young teachers I know get to hear. So I will be going back and watching the video and writing those down. And for the rest of you here, know that in probably another 24 hours or so, we will save this video to our ASBDA YouTube channel and to our ASBDA website. And I hope that many more of our ASBDA members and others will watch, and I know that they will learn from it and gain from it in many ways, as I have, and I'm sure the rest of you feel you have tonight. So Larry, thank you so much for sharing your life and yourself with us.
Thank you. Be safe, everybody.
Okay, thank you. Good night, everybody.